Well, this is not where I expected to be today. And I will ask a bit of grace. I also am recovering from the same cold that stole Colin's voice. So if I have to get another cough drop or drink some water, just bear with me. You may have noticed that Colin is exceptionally quiet today. He hasn't said anything above a whisper since Wednesday. Our house is a little quieter, though the boys seem to be making up for his silence. I did offer to read his sermon today while he acted it out, but he was not a fan of that. He also suggested that I could use several minutes to make fun of him since he can't respond, but that didn't really seem fair. So if I were to have picked a sermon topic, it would not have been love and bartering. Sorry, Colin. I have a great sermon on Elizabeth that I want to share someday, and another on gifts of the Spirit. But something that I learned in seminary is that the best sermon topics are often the ones that you don't want to preach on. I'm not saying that this is going to be the best sermon. I literally found out Friday that I was preaching. Rather, that the message preached out of the text or themes that don't initially speak to you are often the message that most needs to be spoken. This series on Advent and the stages of grief touches on two topics that are both very familiar to us. Through Advent, we hear the story of Mary learning she will have a child and singing her Magnificat, of Mary and Joseph making their way to Bethlehem, of the shepherds in the fields being told by angels of a coming child, of a baby being born and laid in a manger. We have grown up hearing these stories. They are so familiar to us that we can tell them to children without having to pick up a book. They are ingrained into our spirits as Christians, a part of our heritage and a part of our lives. They are stories that we must tell so that generations who come after us will remember them too. Grief, too, is a part of our lives. We most often think of grief as that feeling of loss after a death. We expect grief after huge losses. But grief touches our lives each time we experience change, whether good or bad. When an only child becomes a big brother or sister, they celebrate that change, but also grieve the loss of being an only child. When we are given a promotion at work, we excitedly share the news with friends, while also silently grieving the loss of the familiar. When we finally admit that our favorite shoes are too worn out to wear anymore, we buy new ones and grieve the loss of those perfectly worn-in, comfortable shoes. Grief, like the story of Advent, is ingrained into our spirits, is a part of our heritage as humans and as Christians. And just like the story of Advent, it is an experience that we must tell others about. Part of that experience of grief is the what if. What if I had taken better care of those shoes? What if I had said no to the promotion? What if I had said goodbye one last time? What if I had made different choices? When I started thinking about this topic of love and bartering, it was hard not to think of Reese. These days, Reese is full of bartering. Yesterday, he came to me wanting a treat. We have a box of treats that we keep on the fridge for special occasions. The deal that we have is that if he does a task, he can have a treat. I offered a task to help me pick up the toys in the living room. Well, what if I help pick up, then I can have 2 treats? I reminded Reese that this wasn't a negotiation. Then I remembered that he is 5 and doesn't know what a negotiation is. We've had this conversation probably 100 times over the past month, and yet he persists in trying to barter his way into a better deal, which I will admit sometimes he manages to get. No matter how hard we bargain with God or how hard we negotiate with ourselves, it will not change what we are going through. It will not make the situation easier. No amount of what if eyes will fix the worn soles of our favorite shoes or change the choices we made in the past. No amount of if onlys will bring back a loved one who has passed. I met a family about a year ago during my work as a hospice chaplain. The patient was a veteran of World War II. He and his wife were in their 90s and had lived wonderful lives together. Their daughters were present at every visit I made as they helped to care for both of their parents. At each visit, I would sit at the round kitchen table on a hard wooden chair and listen to the daughters talk about their parents. I usually didn't say much, just listened, then offered to pray with the family before taking my leave. One day, however, the wife spoke up. "What did we do wrong?" she asked me. "Why is God punishing us?" I looked at my patient's wife, a sweet and loving woman who had shared with me her faith in God. She had tears in her eyes as she asked, "What did we do wrong? What could we have done differently?" So often I hear that question from patients who are younger, in their 60s or 70s or even 80s. Patients who are dying of cancer, family members who were surprised about their family member being placed on hospice, deaths which are unexpected. But as I looked at that woman surrounded by her family and loved ones, with the love of her life lying in bed just a room away, I realized that this woman believed that she had done something wrong, that after 90-some years of devotion to God and to her husband, she believed that God was bringing punishment on her in the form of her husband's passing. In her mind, she was asking the what-if questions, trying to bargain her way into a different outcome, wondering what she could have done differently. I wanted to tell this woman that God had blessed her and her husband with wonderfully long lives, with health for many years, with children and a beautiful home. I wanted to say that God wasn't punishing her and that death wasn't a punishment, that God awaited her husband with open arms. But then I realized this was grief, and grief isn't logical. There was no way to explain any of this to her while she was struggling in the midst of the deepest kind of grief. We find ourselves bargaining with God or even with ourselves or with a parent for more candy, and there is no logic to it. Bargaining is simply our minds trying to make sense of what is going on around us, trying to work through what has happened to end up where we are. It is a step towards acceptance along the path of grief. I don't remember exactly what I told my patient's wife, only that I tried to convey to her that God loved her. I prayed with her and tried to remind her of that love in my prayer. I gave book recommendations to her daughters and came to visit one more time before her husband passed. Over the past year, I've thought about her often. I've held her in my heart and hoped that she has remembered God's love even after her husband's passing. I wanted to fix her grief, as I so often want to fix my patient's pain, but that isn't my job. It's one of the hardest parts of being a hospice chaplain, and it's one of the hardest parts of being human. It isn't any of our jobs to walk the path of grief for others. It isn't any of our jobs to answer the what-if questions, because none of the answers we could give could ever satisfy the ache in the hearts of those who are grieving. There is no answer to what if I did something wrong. Only listening ears, open arms, and the knowledge that no matter what, God loves us, forgives us, and accepts us for who we are. It is that love that we recall on this Love Sunday in Advent, that warm, everlasting, grace-filled love that God has for each of God's children, no matter what. So I'm going to walk down here to this mic. I didn't write an invitation because God's supposed to help you with this part. So all I'm going to say is this. If you feel called to join in a community that has that warm love, there's no better community than this one. Because in the 3 years that we've been here? Yeah, 3 years that we've been here, I've never felt so surrounded by love and warmth. And so you should come be a part of this family if you're not already.